Hello and welcome to Shattered Lives. I'm Ciaran Bradley. You're very welcome to part 2 of our special episode on the story of the Hutch-Kinahan feud. With the Special Criminal Court in recess until the 2nd of December, we wanted to bring you the story of what brought us to this point. I'll be speaking to Michael O'Toole, crime correspondent from the Irish Daily Star, about his experiences covering the feud since its beginning. In yesterday's episode, we covered the origins of the gang violence and the escalation after the Regency, as well as the personalities involved. Today, we look deeper into the Guards' response, what the violence has done to Dublin's inner city, and what the future holds for the gangs and for the younger generation who have been pulled into their orbit. So Mick, when we left things yesterday, we were discussing the one-sided nature of the killings up to a certain point in 2018. And at that point, it really looked as if the Kinahans had their boot on the throat of the Hutch crime family. So it sort of begs the question, why did they stop?
Yeah, I think the guards stopped them. There's no doubt, and this has been said, that the Regency Airport hotel attack was a really bad day for the Garda Síochána. I mean, we've spoken about this, the international headlines were terrible. You know, men with Kalashnikovs and dressed up as Gardaí, and around the world, it really did go around the world. So there were it was a bad day. But since then, the Guards have had a lot of good days, and they've had a lot of good days principally against the Kinahan cartel. And I always remember, so the tapes that we listened to in the court between Gerry Hutch and Jonathan Dowdall, according to the state, were on the 7th of March. On the 9th of March, we know that the Kalashnikovs style rifles used in the Regency were seized by the Special Detective Unit in Slane in County Kildare. But also that day, it was the start of the fight back because the Criminal Assets Bureau mounted a series of raids, say against people connected to the Byrne organised crime gang, which is a key part of the Kinahan cartel. And I always look back and think that was the start of the fight back, because they seized millions of euro worth of properties, did the whole big shebang, went after them big time. And subsequent to that, as part of that investigation, people connected to the Byrne crime gang and the Kinahans lost their property. They forfeited cash. So that essentially was the start of it. And what I put that down to was the government, as I said, the government really had to wake up, and they give the Guards 5 million quid extra for overtime within a couple of days, maybe a week or two of the Regency. And that went to what I spoke about the Garda National Drugs Unit in 2010. That was replaced by the Garda Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau, which was the merging of the Organised Crime Unit and the Garda National Drugs Unit. So came Doc B. And, with that extra money, it went into resources, it went into extra overtime, it went into extra bodies on the ground. And really, I thought that was the turning of the tide. And since then, it's been an almost like a tidal wave of Garda successes. I can remember talking to a man called John O'Driscoll, who was the former Guard Assistant Commissioner in charge of Doc B and serious crime. And this was maybe 2020, maybe 2021. He told me that since the Regency, the Guards have foiled 77 hits. Now, wow, maybe all but 4 of them have been connected to the Kinahan Hutch feud. And I can tell you, of all the murders foiled in relation to the Kinahan Hutch feud, the vast majority, in fact, probably all of them, have been Kinahan hits that have been foiled. So the Kinahans were out there. The last murder attributed to the feud was in January 2018, but there have been plenty of attempts before and after that. So the Guards got out there. They have. I'm not saying they got their act together, because they got more money, they got more resources, they got more overtime, and they were able to really dig down and deep. And there were technological advances, evidence gathering, phone recordings, all that sort of stuff, even bugs and everything. And they just became more and more successful, and the Kinahans were getting more and more degraded. As well as those 77 foiled hits, we know that there are probably around 70 Kinahan connected criminals who are in prison. So basically the Guards started locking up criminal gangsters, or Kinahan gangsters. Say somebody like Freddie Thompson, who was jailed for July 2016 murder of a man called Dahi Douglas as part of the feud. He, was brought in by the Kinahans to effectively run the feud in 2015. And because he had experience of running his own feud in Crumlin. He was involved in the cocaine wars, we used to call it. There were a feud in Crumlin during in the early 90s. 15 people were murdered. His gang murdered most of them. He was behind all these murders. So the Kinahans brought in him, or were using him. So he had expertise in essentially how to kill people. He's locked up. People like Liam Brannigan, one of the main Kinahan operators in Dublin, is locked up. A man called Declan Brady, Kinahan's, we used to call him the chief executive. He was Mr. Nobody because he had such a low profile, but he was described just as the chief executive of the gang in Dublin. He's locked up. He got 10 years for weapons offences. So they started, harassing the Kinahans, getting their better intelligence, getting cooperation from various police forces, using electrical, surveillance and, phone technology, all that sort of stuff. And they just focused in the Kinahans and started to degrade them. So essentially, by January 2018, when the last murder of a man, as this James Buddha Molyneux carried out, it was carried out, the Kinahans didn't really have that many gunmen left. Some of them are abroad. Some of them a lot are in prison. Some are abroad because there's evidence against them and they can't come back to Ireland or else they'll be jailed. So really, the gang has been degraded, and it took 2 years of really hard slog by the guards to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I actually know a few people who are in the guards in Dublin, and it has dominated their professional life for quite a long time. It's quite interesting as well, just drawing on that kind of personal experience, in that the Regency literally happened in the middle of a general election campaign in 2016 as well, and obviously we've come to remember that through the audio recordings from Dowdall and Hutch. But you do in your kind of more cynical moments think that maybe if you are at the top brass of the An Garda Síochána, think that maybe something of this magnitude is a way to reiterate the importance of the Garda's general operational duties every day, and to literally say, listen, we need the money to do this job. So, I mean, I'd be interested to get your kind of sense of, when you speak to guards, obviously you will do in the course of your job all the time. I guess, what is their sort of professional opinion of this? I mean, is it something they see as a career case, for example?
How can I say this? They enjoy locking up criminals. So, the interaction that most people would have with guards would be at checkpoints, if they're checking your tax discs or insurance. But every guard is part of it. We have a unitary police force. So, say in England, there's MI5, which deals with state security, and then there's maybe 25 different county police forces and all that sort of stuff, and you have the counter-terrorism police, all that sort of stuff. There's one police force in Ireland. So the person who stops you on Gardiner Street and asks about your tax and insurance is also the same person who can go and collate, Daniel Kinahan walking down the street with one of his men, and that goes into the central intelligence. So guards, they're all part of the intelligence gathering police force, and they're a part of a law enforcement police force. But look, they really enjoy going after criminals. I think an awful lot of them, it's why they joined the Garda Síochána. But what they did say to me was, listen, and these would be people who would be at the forefront of fighting organised crime like the Kinahans. He said, if we get the money, we will go after them and we will degrade them. And to be fair to them, when they did get the money, they did go after them and they did degrade them. So for me, policing it, it's quite simple. If the guards have the resources, they will do the job. But I mean, guards, I'm not being cynical, guards would always say, the job's goosed, and they want to use a stronger language than that. But once once they have the proper funding and the proper resources, they can go after them, and there are very few gangs who are immune to that. And I think, to be fair, that's probably been borne out. It was really only when the state went, okay, the Kinahans are a major threat to us, and the resources went to the guards, that the worm turned. Because I mean, let's be honest about this. Look, guards will contextualise the Regency. It was a very bad day, and they will say, look, that was in the middle of austerity. Yeah, fewer guards than ever before back then. Lots of resignations and retirements of really experienced people, and and there was just, austerity was a terrible time for everybody, and it was really bad for the guards because they were losing so many people and everything. Once the money came along, they were able to go after them. And I think, to be fair, that's a good argument.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the reality is this is all political, whether we like it or not, in one sense. I'd like to come on to your own experiences just in a moment, obviously, in your kind of recollections of what's happened. But just it actually came to pass that last night I was speaking to somebody who is working with young people in the inner city, and we were talking about the pod and the like, and he just offered his kind of opinion on it, which was that he sees in Crumlin in one area and other areas of the south end of the city. Young lads getting pulled into working for the Kinahans, frankly, and people who are very talented sports people falling out and roaming states doing and earning good money. If you're a kid, like, this is good money, and it's very tempting to act the hard man and all that goes with it. And this might not be a question that you can answer because obviously you have your particular beat. But what is your general sense of the impact that this feud has had on Dublin as a city?
Guards are worried that it's very, very concentrated. Look, it is largely north central Dublin. And guards are very, very worried that there's going to be a sort of transgenerational aspect of this. There could be young kids growing up today going, he killed my dad, or he killed my brother, or he killed my friend, or whatever. So there's a level of worry there, because it's not as if it's, just to give an example, it's not as if it's all the heads in Crumlin where the Burn crime gang is going north side, crossing over the Lefty, and was attacking people in north central Dublin. What was happening was they were using people in the community, in the north central community, to go after other people in the north central community, and very often they lived in the same street, or they lived in nearby. And the underworld, people know, and I lost the count of times say there'd been a shooting, and not guards, but sometimes guards, members of the community that we would talk to go, oh yeah, we know who did that, that's your man. And I go, I thought he was on the Hutch side. I know he's been bought over. So I'm not. I don't want to say it's like a civil war, but there was a certain aspect to it of betrayal, because people knew each other and people worked with each other, and they were friends. They went to school and everything. So there are deep scars here. Now, we've been very lucky because of the guard actions and because Kinahan has left Ireland and everything that has happened. There hasn't been a murder since January 2018, but there have been plenty of efforts and there have been plenty of attempts. Like, even off the top of my head, I can think of people who were done for an attempt to murder Patsy Hutch, and there were three lads done, and they weren't from Crumlin, they were from Cabra and I think one was from Phibsborough. You know what I mean? So it's that general area. So it's really concentrated in that area, and the worry would be that those divisions and tensions will continue down the generations. So I will say one other thing, Ciaran, and I always say this. Look, I'm at the sharp end, and guards are at the sharp end of the crime. But very often when the guards are involved, and very often when there is criminality, it's, without getting totally, pinko, shall we say, it's a failure in society. It's not, that's the culmination of so many different other things. What can young kids do? How can young kids be taken out of poverty if they see 19-year-old fellas driving BMW Jeeps and having all those big expensive watches? If there's nothing for them in society, they will be sucked into this. So it's, when the guards are involved, society has failed. I really do. It's too late when the guards are involved. So it's about prevention and trying to stop young fellas getting involved. But, they see money, and if they don't have any hopes themselves, you can understand why young fellas do get involved or are drawn into it.
Oh, absolutely. And I think actually this was why it was so jarring speaking to this guy last night, in the sense that he was someone who had really got through to these young lads as a football coach, and was talking to them on their level. He was getting them to do something they really enjoyed, and he was one of these kind of almost air valves that kind of releases the pressure on some people who are heading down that road. And I think that was why he was particularly sort of disappointed by it. But anyway, we'll move on slightly, but just on that sort of transgenerational point though, and actually to bring in the Garda response as well, this is increasingly a feud that's moved to social media. We've had reports in the Star and various other newspapers under our banner that this is increasingly going on TikTok and Snapchat and various others. And I'm not going to sound like some horribly out of touch Generation X lad here, but this must pose a particular problem for the guards in terms of trying to keep a tab on intelligence, and also just try and prevent stuff from happening before it escalates and gets out of hand.
No, I think it's probably a boon to the Gardaí that there has been so much social media about this, because it's sources of information. It's OSINT, they call it open source intelligence, so they can see who's tweeting what. Or I do think that there was a heavy element of Twitter, especially in the early days, And from a journalistic perspective, it was hectic, but the amount of information we got via Twitter, I mean, I'm talking about people giving us information, not publicly, but privately. It was a great way for people to contact us. And I'll just give you a perfect example. Shortly after the Regency, I was in my office one day and somebody contacted me and said, listen, you guys don't know this, but because nobody really knew, just remember we spoke about the attempt on Daniel Kinahan's life in November. He said there was a guy called Darren Kearns who was killed in around New Year's Day 2016 in Dublin, just the same time as they tried to kill Gerry Hutch in Spain. You guys don't know this, but he was killed, and Dahi Douglas, who we know was killed in July, he survived a hit I think it was late. It was November, around shortly after the Red Cow. He survived a shooting in Cabra. He was out walking his dog and he was shot. And this contact said, or he became a contact, or they became a contact. Said, you guys don't know this, but those two men were shot because they tried to kill Daniel Kinahan at the Red Cow Hotel in Dublin in November, right? And I went, yeah. And I thought it was complete nonsense. I made one call, right? And I asked somebody and they said, yeah, about that is very, very tight and it's being investigated as we speak. And that was sensational because we were the first people to break the whole Darren Kearns thing, murder being connected to the feud, and now everybody accepts it. And it came from that one person contacting us. So that person contacted me via social media and became a very important contact. But it just goes to show you how, in times of a crisis like that, there was a flood of information and a flood of people coming to us. Now, look, there is this disinformation, but, social media has been great for me because it's a great way for guards and criminals to contact me and to contact other journalists. They feel, with anonymity in certain cases, they feel safer about being talked to, or that, that there are ways that they're, without getting into too much, that they can talk to me in ways that can't be, traced by the guards. So they have that level of security. So it's been a great boon for us, the technology there. But look, there's no doubt about it. Social media played a really, really important role. We know that if you think back, there was when Daniel Kinahan tried to reinvent himself, one of the 6 times he tried to reinvent himself as Mr. Fix-It for boxing, there was this real social media campaign. I think there was a hashtag Regency cover-up and everything, and we were getting all these abusive tweets and stuff from all these people in Scotland.
Oh, God, yeah.
Why are all these Scottish people suddenly trying to mansplain Irish crime to me? Because it was like, why have you not done this, Michael? And, that's fine, like, it's no problem, but it was clearly concerted, and there was clearly a concerted campaign. Look, there was a concerted campaign by Kinahan and his allies, and there was definitely a campaign by people anti-Kinahan or pro-Hutch crime gang, whatever you want to call it. And there was this battle going on, in the internet, and we were part of it because we were getting stories. So I would never turn down a story as long as it's true. So my attitude when somebody tells me something on Twitter or DM or whatever, no problem, I'm going to check it out, and if it's true, I'll run it, and if it's not, I'll never talk to you again. Because some people do try to pull the wool over your eyes, but we go and check these things, so that's grand. But it was really interesting just to watch the Twitter war, because for 2 or 3 years it was really intense. They were really, really going for it, and there were various personalities who were, Daniel Kinahan was on Twitter. We know he was on Twitter, and he had an account that he didn't know I knew about, but I knew about, and various other people were on Twitter. So it was really, really interesting watching that. So it was sort of like the war was going on in Dublin, and the war was going on in the Twitter sphere and other ones as well. So it was really interesting.
Yeah, there were certainly a few facets to it. I was working in sports media for another outlet at that time, and actually it felt like we were one arm of the culture war that was going on around this kind of fake news media and hashtag scum media and stuff. And it was literally, I couldn't have been happier when the move against the Kinahans happened, in the sense that we were right all along, and the people who were saying that black was white and white was black, it does give you a certain professional satisfaction. It would be remiss to say that it didn't. And on the subject of journalists loving the smell of their own farts, Mick, you've obviously been doing this for a long time, and I know I was being somewhat facetious there, but obviously this is a career case, if you like. This is something that's dominated the majority of your recent working life, I suppose. I mean, just give us a sense of it. Like, what are your abiding memories? How do you look at this period? I mean, are you looking, say, for example, now at the trial at the moment as something of a kind of drawing down of the curtain? Just give us a sense.
No, I'm not, Ciaran. I'll be honest. we don't know what'll happen in the future, but I don't think it's the end of the Hutch crime gang, and I don't think, and it's definitely not the end of the Kinahan cartel. Daniel Kinahan, obviously, he's in the Middle East somewhere. It could be Dubai, it could be Qatar, could be somewhere else. But no, this is just, I'll put it this way, I think this is just another chapter. What was it like in the feud? It's really hard to explain, but it was unlike anything. And I mean, I covered the Troubles, like the end of the Troubles. I covered various, very big things, say like the Uma bomb. I was at the centre of that because of communications I received and stuff. So, that was really, really hectic. But that was for 2 days. The intensity of this feud, really, it was at its most intense, say probably from September 2015 until 2018, maybe July 2018, when it was just at the forefront. So that's almost 3 years, and it was every day. It was like doing a marathon every day, and there were very, very long days. I mean, I have to say, I did have security threats at one stage, but it didn't come from the Kinahan gang. I've never personally felt at risk from the Kinahan cartel. I always thought, and I know that there were issues with other journalists, I'm only talking about myself, I always sort of felt that I never had any fears that the Kinahans would go after me or cause me any difficulties. There were ways that we had with communicating with people and I never felt at risk, right? And it never entered my head once that the Kinahans would go after me or do anything. I did have a security issue, but it was with someone, and I had to get the involvement of Gardaí, shall we say, and that was very. It's a very lonely place. 3 o'clock in the morning, you hear the slightest noise outside your house, even though there's Garda attention at your house and you're getting all this stuff. It's you're basically alone, and that came from someone who would have been aligned to the Hutch gang. Now, it wasn't the Hutch gang themselves going after me, but it was someone connected to them who took an issue with something I'd written and issued threats. Now, he was a very volatile person, and it was for about 4 months. It was extremely nerve-wracking, and I had to watch where I went. But the issue has now gone away. But look, most journalists get grief, but that aspect of the threat and the hassle I got from that one man, it was extremely nerve-wracking, and it felt extremely lonely. But look, journalistically, it was an extremely challenging time. There were good aspects to it because you developed plenty of new sources because there was so much information coming in and so many people wanted to get their speak in that you did develop. I made some fantastic sources. Thankfully, I still have them to this day. Now, I lost some sources as well because, it happens. But, journalistically, it was very interesting. It was very demanding, but it was very challenging at the same time.
Yeah, well, that's fascinating, Mick. I think that's as good a place as any to draw down the curtain. But is there anything that you wanted to cover that we maybe haven't gone into, but in any detail?
Well, yeah. Just for a couple of minutes, we know that in April this year, the international law enforcement, the guards, and the Americans and various other ones made their move on Daniel Kinahan. So he's over in the Middle East. So that move against Daniel Kinahan really has come about. Not, I consider it's come about because of the havoc he wrought in Dublin, where he thought he was unreachable, and he prosecuted this horrific war. So, looking back, the Kinahans' move and the Kinahan onslaught against their enemies, I think it's the biggest tactical mistake that any criminal has ever made, because he brought a huge amount of heat on his gang and his money-making empire. So, what I'm really interested in is what happens next. The Yanks are after him, and once the Americans have got you in your sights, it's not as if you can get away that easily. So the next year or two will be very, very interesting just to see what becomes of Daniel Kinahan, and to see if I personally think, and Gerry Harris alluded to this, I think if he is going to be brought to justice, shall we say, my opinion, it's only an opinion, my belief is it probably won't be Ireland, it'll be in America, and it could be one of those supermax prisons like El Chapo. So what happens next will be extremely interesting. It's been the last 8 years, maybe almost 10 years, I suppose, have been really interesting. Let's see what the next few years bring.
Yeah, it did spring to mind, actually. I was reading about the Operation Desert Light, Europol bringing down the super cartel of cocaine dealers. And I did see that the UAE were one of the sort of intelligence sources, and it did occur to me that, the net, I know we are under the impression that he may have moved from the UAE, but It does certainly feel like it's becoming more of a closed net now.
No, what this taught me is we're now in an era of, look, criminals don't respect borders, but I think we're now in an era of unprecedented international cooperation, where, if you like, law enforcement doesn't respect the same borders, and in other words, they're all working together. So, it's a new era of cooperation, and that puts pressure on people like Kinahan and all the others.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, long may it continue. Mick, thanks a million for your time once again. It's always a pleasure. I'm sure hearing how close the feud came to your front door will give people a sense that this job is not exactly a walk in the park at times. That's it from us today. We'll be back with you when proceedings at the Special Criminal Court resume at the murder trial of Gerry the Monk Hutch. If you've enjoyed today's episode and would like to hear more of Mick and Paul's experiences covering crime in Ireland, be sure to get in touch with us on Twitter. We're keen to give you more of what you want. In the meantime, thanks to Mick, and we'll speak to you soon. Take care. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, be sure to subscribe to Shattered Lives wherever you get your podcasts. We also have an extensive back catalogue of interviews which you may enjoy. Shattered Lives is produced by Ciaran Bradley for Reach Ireland.